she will directly invite Jemima to come and give her keynote address, just to welcome us, to honor and celebrate Jemima even this Monday at the ongoing 79th UN General Assembly session happening in New York, at an event that was convened by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Jemima was named and honored as one of the 10 champions, goalkeepers, as they call them. And as we go along, we'll get to hear more about that. But very warm welcome to you, Susan. A warm welcome to you, Jemima. And I'd like to invite you, Susan, to please take over.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Doreen. And a warm welcome to all of you to this launch of the course on gender in agri-food systems policies. As Doreen have said, I can repeat it. A warm welcome to you, our fellows, our Cohort 2 fellows. A warm welcome to award team. A warm welcome to the A team, that our trainers who have really helped to put this together. Before I go to and a warm welcome to Dr. Jemima Njoki, our keynote speaker today. Before I go to my remarks, allow me to very quickly introduce award. I know you've heard this before, but we always like to repeat it in case there are people who don't know about award. So award was founded in 2008 as a career development fellowship program that really aimed to widen the pipeline of confident, capable, and influential African women scientists in the agriculture research for development sector in Africa. And we recognize that if we're going to empower these women, we really needed to build their skills. So we developed a whole toolkit of tailored trainings on leadership, on mentoring, on technical skills, but also skills in increasing their women's visibility and access to networks. We work at the individual level, which is where we do the leadership training, but we also work at institutional level, where we are really strengthening capacity of AR4D organizations to integrate gender in their policies and practices. And then we also work at the enabling environment level, where we are catalyzing the design and implementation of gender-responsive agri-food systems policies. Why is it important? Why the focus on policies? I think what is very clear and what we are finding out is that the world is not on track to meet the SDG targets by 2030, and that there are substantial gender gaps remaining. We, together with FAO, the Natural Resources Institute, IDRC, and CGIAR Gender Impact Platform, and Care International, are in the process of producing a report. And the report is called The Status of Women in Agri-Food Systems in Sub-Saharan Africa. And the report is really aiming to take stock of progress, but also provide the most up-to-date data and evidence on where we are, but also provide recommendations that are focusing on the region. So in this report, we are finding out very quickly, we have some emerging findings, and what it's telling us is what we've always known. It's telling us, number one, that agri-food systems are a major employer of women globally, and that they constitute an important source of livelihood for women, actually much more so than for men in many African countries. However, despite the importance of agri-food systems to women's livelihoods, women who work in agriculture production tend to do so under highly unfavorable conditions. The emerging findings show that there are still substantial gender gaps that remain. And when we look at women's working conditions, their access to land, inputs, services, digital technology, finance, all of these which are important for working in agri-food systems, we find that women continue to lag behind men. And let me also mention, when you look at unpaid care work, what we have in the evidence we have in all the countries where there is available data, because we don't have as much data available, women still spend significantly more time in unpaid and care work than men. What this does is it limits their availability, their time available for other activities, including leisure or remunerative work. So for us, we know that policies have an important role to play in helping to eliminate this gender-based discrimination and promoting equal access and control over resources, services, and opportunities. We know that policy reforms can provide the legal framework for driving action and allocating the required resources. So this brings me back to why we really are so proud of the current fellowship. The Gender Responsive Agriculture Systems Policy Fellowship allows us to intervene at the policy level. So through this fellowship, we really want to catalyze the design and implementation of gender responsive agri-food systems policies. We want to grow a pool of powerful, confident, capable African women who can lead policy changes and policy reform. As you know, this fellowship is targeting 100 policy fellows who will work with 100 senior policy experts, and who will also, and the policy fellows will also work with 100 emerging policy professionals. And you all come from 12 African countries. And as I close, what we are doing is, with this fellowship, we build the leadership skills, as we've always done. We also are partnering you with mentors, technical skills, but also what we are doing and what this course is doing is equipping you with the knowledge and skills to advocate for and influence gender responsiveness in policy. We're going to provide you with guidance tools, methods, techniques that will really help you in designing and implementing gender responsive policies in the African continent. And as part of this, I know that yesterday you were in a training course on how to implement policy innovation projects, which will allow you to really put your ideas into practice. So I'm going to stop there. I know that in the next few weeks, you're going to learn a lot. Please take advantage of this training and use it to advance your career goals. So thank you very much. And now it is my pleasure to introduce my friend, my very good friend, Dr. Jemima Njuki, who is the Chief of Economic Empowerment at UN Women. And as Doreen said, let's also congratulate Jemima for being selected as one of the 10 goalkeepers of 2024. And of course, this recognition is because of all the work she has done to date, working at the intersection of gender equality, women's empowerment, and food security and nutrition. Let's first appreciate Jemima as she comes on. Congratulations, Jemima. Well done. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Susan. Thank you, Doreen, for the congratulations. It's such a pleasure for me to join you this morning. It's morning in New York on very busy week that has been combining the Summit of the Future, the UN General Assembly, New York Climate Week. So we've been running around from place to place, but it's such a pleasure for me to join you this morning. Thank you, Susan, always for inviting me to talk to the fellows. Yesterday, I was actually saying we are soon handing over the mantle. So it's good to see this group of fellows because we are handing over the mantle to them. I won't even go too much into why gender equality is important for food systems, because I know I'm talking to a group of fellows that are the converted, but just to reiterate what Susan said, that although we know we have made so much progress on gender equality, and next year we will be celebrating Beijing Plus 30, and part of what we really want to do is celebrate that progress that we have made. At least we know women are highly educated now. We have more girls going through education than we've ever had, especially in our region. We know we have cut maternal deaths a lot. We have reduced child mortality. So we have made progress, but at the same time, we also need to recognize that huge gender gaps remain, and this report that award is doing is really going to be important in terms of telling us where we are and what we need to do to achieve equality for the women and girls in the continent. One of the things that strikes me at this point in time is that although we are in this celebratory mood of Beijing Plus 30, every year we also launch a report called the Gender Snapshot together with UNDESA. And this gender snapshot looks at the status of gender equality across all the SDGs. And there are two things that struck me in that report. The first one is that a child born today will not see the end of poverty for women and girls because it's going to take us the next 137 years if we don't act. The second one is around the gender pay gap, because the status of women in agri-food systems showed us that women are being paid 82 cents in the ag sector, in the agri-food sector, for every dollar that men are being paid. And this is not going to change for the next 250 years if we are not intentional at the pace this has been going. And so it gives me great pleasure to actually see a group of people that are committed to changing that status quo, because we really have to be intentional about changing that status quo. So I want to talk about three things. One is some of the policies that I think have the greatest potential for change if we are intentional about how we address gender equality in these policies. And then the second thing I want to talk about is just what are some of the entry points that I see for you as fellows to actually influence these policies, because sometimes policy influence does seem like a difficult task. As an individual, you worry that whatever you're doing is not enough to shift policies. But there are actually very clear entry points that as fellows we can engage, you can engage in, to make sure that the policies our governments are coming up with actually have a focus on gender equality and will have meaningful impacts on women and girls. So a couple of things. Agriculture policy is complex. Agri-food systems policies are complex. And the reason why they're complex is because it's not just one policy, right? There isn't a country that says, okay, this is our agriculture policy. There's so many policies that influence agri-food systems and how agri-food systems function. And as you think about policy change, you really have to think about this diversity of policies so that you are not stuck in trying to find out what is this national agriculture policy that we should be influencing. In many cases, actually, the agriculture policy will be a collection of policies. And so it's really important that we start to have a good idea and a good understanding. What are these policies that influence what happens in the agri-food system? And I want to highlight just 7 groups of those policies. And I know there is many others, and then I'll talk about some opportunities that I see. The first set of policies. I'm sorry about that. I think I froze for a moment.
Yes,
but I'm
you
back.
did.
Yeah.
But
I don't know, my computer tried to update. I hope it's not gonna go off in the middle of this. So the first set of policies are policies around land. And these are policies that guarantee access to and ownership of land by women. And there are two sets of these policies. First, it is the national policies around land. In some countries, issues of land are entrenched in the constitution. In a lot of countries, these issues are not entrenched in the constitution. And so one of the things that you need at least to be aware of is there's a lot of policies that guarantee or that recognize the rights to land by men and women. But in a lot of cases, these policies do not really guarantee that those land rights will be respected, that women, by changes of their marital status, by changes of different relationship status, they don't always guarantee that women will continue to have that ownership, use, and control over land. And so this is an area where we really need to move the needle on, that we are not just recognizing the rights to ownership of land, but that there are mechanisms for guaranteeing the continuation and securing those rights in the absence of the relationship status that women hold. So this is rights to land on dissolution of marriage. This is rights to marital property on death of a spouse. So even as you look at land rights and land laws, which is what you think would be very directly related to the agri-food systems, it also means you need to be looking at what's the matrimonial property law in the country. Does it continue to guarantee the rights to land by women on dissolution of marriage? So for those of you looking to go into issues around land policies and what land policies in your countries say about women's rights to ownership, don't just look at the land policy. Look at the other policies that are related to that, because actually that's where the issues are. The issues sometimes are not in the recognition of the rights of women to own land. The issues are on the security of those rights. So that's the first set of rights where I know that those of us in agri-food systems have had a very limited focus on just looking at what the land policies say and what land acts say, without looking at what does family law also say about the security of those rights? What does the matrimonial property law say about the security of those rights? The second set of policies are just about ownership of other resources and what these other policies say about gender equality. One of the things that, for those of you that follow what's happening in the UN, on Sunday, governments adopted the Pact for the Future. And one of the annexes of the Pact for the Future is the Digital Compact. Now, when government started debating the Digital Compact, they were silent on gender equality in that digital space. Yeah. And one of the things that we have had to work very hard on is to put gender equality in the Digital Compact. So when we think about, you might sit and think, what does our digital policy have to do with agri-food systems? But every day, information is being passed through digital tools and digital technologies, right? And so looking at what your national policies, your national digital policies say about gender equality, and not just about use, but even the involvement of women in coming up with those policies and the innovations and the digital innovations is really critical. So do not think that the digital policy is removed or is a policy that's removed from agri-food systems policy, because what is put in those policies has a bearing on women's access to information, on how we remove bias from digital tools, and especially with the growth of AI. So I'm really hoping that one of you will even look at what are the implications for AI on women working in agri-food systems. Do we want to build the same inequalities in new technologies as what we are trying to address now? Because if we can address that at policy level, it means we don't have to come after the fact to say, how do we change these policies so that they are aligned to gender equality? So look at the policies and the relationship policies to land and to agri-food systems. The third and often not discussed set of policies are policies on universal social protection. And these have a huge implication for women that are working in agri-food systems. One, because we know there's a huge gender gap in coverage of social protection. But two, because we also know that social protection often leaves out those who are in the informal sector. And a lot of the women working in agri-food systems, either because they're providing labor on their own firms or they're working in informal, as you know, as labor workers in farms and in factories, the risk that they're left out of social protection systems is extremely, extremely high. And so how we guarantee that the jobs in the agri-food systems are decent jobs that offer social protection mechanisms. For a lot of us who work either in research, in the UN system, in government organizations, we know that we are covered for health insurance. Yeah, we are covered for our pensions. When we leave, we know we are going to have a pension. We are covered for so many things. But what happens to those agricultural wage laborers? What is it that we can change in our labor laws that actually allows agricultural wage laborers, especially women, to have those same kinds of social protection? So look at what your social protection policies say, especially with respect to women working in informal sectors, including the agriculture sector. The fourth set of policies, and that they are related very much to the social protection policies, are policies on decent work. Are women agricultural workers covered, for example, by minimum wage policies? What is happening in that sector with respect to minimum wages? How many of your countries have ratified Convention 190? Do you all know what the ILO Convention 190 is? The ILO Convention 190 is on prevention of sexual harassment in the world of work. And yet, across sectors, whether it is in tea factories, that's where we are seeing sexual harassment of women workers. In factory floors, on firms, what do our policies say about the protection of women working in agriculture and food systems? So these policies are also important, but it's also policies that support women entrepreneurs and women-owned businesses that are in the agriculture and food systems space. So think about, I don't know, I come from Kenya and I know we have an affirmative procurement policy. How many of our agri-food entrepreneurs can supply goods and services as part of the affirmative procurement? What are some of the blocks that they face in that policy? How can we reform that policy so that it is actually conducive to even women working in agri-food systems? The fifth set of policies are around unpaid care and domestic work. So these are policies that recognize, reduce, redistribute unpaid care work, care and domestic work, but also call for rewarding and representation of care norms. And one of the reasons why these policies is so important is because these are the policies that free up women's time so that they have time to participate in economic activity. So 2 countries in Africa, only 2 countries in Africa are even moving in the direction of having national policies and strategies on care. That's Kenya and Cape Verde. Kenya right now, there's a draft policy that's about to go to cabinet. So for those fellows working in Kenya, have you seen this draft policy? What does it say about women in rural areas? What does it say about women working in agriculture? What does it say about domestic work? If there is conversations or statements there on covering women in rural areas, does it cover their domestic work or does it just cover childcare? What does it say? Yeah, so those in Kenya need to be looking at this policy and being part of those discussions on that policy. And the idea is that we can get the African Union engaged in this so that we can have more of those policies across the continent. And then the 6th set of policies are on women's leadership. I think one of the strangest things we see in the agriculture sector is, and you will see the data from this upcoming report, if we have 66% of working women in Africa working in agri-food systems, why do we have so little representation of women in leadership positions in the ag sector, both in research and in policy? How can we make sure these are aligned? How can we make sure that if we believe women are important for producing our food, that they are also important in leading the organizations that govern our food system? So looking at some of those, when they say, not more than this % of the same gender in leadership, what are they referring to? Is it just the political space, or does it also include the economic space that would then include the agriculture space? And we've seen some important policies. Ghana has just passed one. Sierra Leone has one that requires 30% of all jobs across all sectors, public and private, that are held by women. So how do we start analyzing what these policies say in our countries and expanding the scope of those policies? And then, of course, the last policies around data, because without data, then we can't tell whether we're making progress or not. I am going to stop there on the policies, but as you can tell, I care a lot about policies given our mandate at UN Women. I think there is such strong interconnections between policies, and the more we look at the policies that are outside of the agriculture sector that then affect the women in the agriculture sector, I think the more we can get protections for women who are working in food systems, and the more we can start closing these gaps that we see on gender inequality. I want to talk about 2 big entry points that I see for you coming up. One is the Committee on World Food Security approved in 2023 the voluntary guidelines on gender equality in the context of food and nutrition security. These are guidelines that all our governments agreed to at the last CFS 51 session. At the CFS 52nd session that's happening in October, we are going to be discussing the implementation of these voluntary guidelines. And there will be a requirement that every country then localizes, takes ownership of these voluntary guidelines and implement these voluntary guidelines, right? And so please, if you don't know about these guidelines, go find them, because after CFS 52 in October, governments are going to then be required to put in place implementation mechanisms for these guidelines. To what extent can you influence then what happens in this domestication and localization of the voluntary guidelines? It is unlikely that governments will be implementing the full set of the guidelines, so there will be prioritization. Please be part of that process of prioritizing the implementation, the ownership, the domestication of the voluntary guidelines on gender equality in the context of food and nutrition security. That's one. The second entry point, very low-hanging fruit, is in 2025, all governments are supposed to develop their next cycle of their NDCs, the nationally determined contributions. That is in 2025. This year in Baku, we will be discussing a revitalization or this next phase of the Lima program of work and gender action plan on climate. Those of you that are not going to be in Baku, please look for the outcomes of that. But most importantly, look for who your national focal points, your gender focal points, your gender coordinators of the UNFCCC are, because what they are gearing up for right now is developing the next NDCs. Those NDCs are how governments implement, finance climate change initiatives in country. So if we don't have gender in those NDCs, then it means gender will not be financed by government as part of their national climate strategies. So that is a very direct entry point, especially for you, for those of you that are working at the intersection of food and climate, to influence what the NDCs in your countries are going to look like. And every country has a gender focal point to the climate negotiations, climate discussions. They will come from Baku with an enhanced Lima program of work, or with discussions on what's going to go into that Lima program of work. And they will be looking for support in terms of how to then get gender equality into these nationally determined contributions. So those are two very clear entry points that I see that you can start working on right now, that you can start making the connections right now. And I hope that if I join you for a next seminar, that I will see some of these as your policy projects that you're doing, so that we can get gender equality much more into our national strategies and policies, not just those directly in food, in agriculture policy, but those that are related to climate, those that are related to decent jobs, those that are related to care work, etc. So I'm going to stop there, Susan, noting that that might be an information overload for the fellows, but I really wanted to I know you all know why gender equality and women's empowerment is important, so I didn't want to focus on that now, but to really provide you a scope of what some of the entry points could be in terms of policy influence in these gender equality broader agri-food systems looks like. So I'm going to stop there and see if there are any questions.
Thank you very much, Jemima. Please join me in appreciating Jemima. I am not a policy fellow, but my thinking right now is really triggered, and I'm sure all of us who are thinking about our policy innovation projects, we have lots of ideas. already in our minds about particularly on the entry points, and you having given that big, very important overview of some of the, what you call the important or the policy areas that have the potential to make a change in agri-food systems. And what I'm hearing you say is that we really need to be aware and pay attention to the interconnection of the policies, of course, the complexity of the agri-food systems and the agri-food systems policies, and how the different policies are interrelated. What I want to mention now, as I invite you to type your questions, if you have them in the chat, I know my colleagues are monitoring the chat, is Jemima has mentioned the reports. You've mentioned the snapshot report that usually tracks the gender equality, the status of gender equality across all the SDGs. So we will compile some of these resources and share with you. Jemima has also mentioned the voluntary guidelines. We will also share the link with you. We've had several sessions in the past and brought focal points for these guidelines. So those are some of the things that we can compile already for you to be able to begin interrogating with. But I want to go to the chat and see if there's any particular question to Jemima. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions yet. Lots of congratulations, yes. Okay, and Jemima has already put the link for the Gender Snapshot 2024. It's in the chat, but our colleagues will compile this and give you all of them as well in case you're not able to get them. Yes, I'm inviting questions, comments. The floor is open for us to continue engaging and interacting with Jemima on the topic of today.
I can also take the lack of questions, Doreen, as a fact that I was clear and concise.
Lots of information to ruminate on for sure. I can see a hand up. Okay. Mami, will you be speaking in French or English? Go on.
I can speak in English. For this presentation, Dr. Jemima, it was very helpful, and gives us some orientation to go with our projects and studies for further within this fellowship. I wanted just to share that the group of grass mentees in Madagascar, we did some work during July and August to try to to get to this entry point of climate change. The difficulty we had is to meet some government, let's say, agreements or engagement, because we are in on a period of election until end of this year. So they are not interested in, and there are a lot of change between ministries about policies and other things. So it was quite hard to meet some of these people and to try to present them what we did. As we started to analyze the engagement of Madagascar with the agricultural and food system declaration from the climate talk last year. So yeah, there is always this let's say to face the politics.
Sorry, please mute your mics, but I'm also going to request my colleagues, because they have the power to mute people who might have forgotten to mute their microphones, so that we minimize interruptions. Go on, Mami.
Yeah, just to wrap up, even if we go further within our subject and with which we are patient, we are facing this, this politics who are not interested in at this time. Even if we started our, ability to influence, the ability to make network, to have some people helping us influencing, we cannot until some status make further steps about acting on this almost about the climate change topics.
Okay, thank you so much. Jemima, I hope you got the question. For me, what I'm hearing you say, okay, go on.
So one of the things to understand is that policymaking is an inherently political process, right? And part of the work that needs to be done is identifying what are those moments during that policymaking process where there is opportunity to engage. Because these policies, it's not always an open process that because I have something to say, that I will influence a policy, or because I have some data that relates to a policy, that's the right time to influence the policy. And so it's also good not to just understand what the policies that need influence are, but also what is that political policymaking process and where the entry points are. It is one of the reasons why I have mentioned those two moments that we are in now. Every government is going to produce an NDC and a plan and an action plan for implementation of that NDC, because there's a requirement that they submit those NDCs as part of their UNFCCC, commitments, right? So right now, it is all open. A lot of governments are having consultations about what goes into their NDCs. They've been having the NDCs whose cycle is ending in 2024, 2025, they get new ones. So if you tried to influence the NDCs last year, there would have been no opportunity to influence the NDCs last year because the NDCs were set and they were going to end in 2024. But now this is the political moment to influence the NDCs. And for most policies, there's always that political moment where it is the right time to influence influence a policy. The other thing to know is, especially as researchers, that the fact that we have data, that may not be what is needed to influence the policymaking process. So we also need to know what is it we are trying to influence it with, right? So having data about the status of women in agri-food systems, that's important for adding to our knowledge, right? But what is a policymaker going to do with our particular data? I'll give you an example of the work we do in care. We've always had women's time use data, not consistently, but most times we will know how much time are men using in unpaid care, how many hours are women spending on care. But that information is not what changes policy. One of the countries where we are seeing movement towards changing policy is the countries where we are presenting data on, if you invest in care, this is the number of jobs you're going to create. And this is the kind of investment that you need to make. If you invest in those jobs, this is how much you expand your tax collection base. So we also need to figure out, what is that data? What is that evidence? What is that knowledge that becomes persuasive knowledge in terms of changing policies? Because not all data is useful for policymaking. As researchers, there's data we just collect because we want to understand the problem, right? And then there's data we collect because we are informing solutions. So what is that data that informs? What is that knowledge that we have as researchers that informs policy solutions. So also thinking a little bit about what it is we are influencing policy with.
Very clear. Thank you, Dr. Jemima.
Thank you very much, Jemima. I want to take two more questions. I'm looking at the time. Okay, I'm seeing 3 hands, and Ndeye's hand was first up. So I'll go to Ndeye, then Kumbali, and then finally I'll finish with Maria, in that order. And then we'll come back to you, Jemima, to take those 3 questions. Please make your questions short. If you could take less than 1 minute so that we also save on time. And if you go past 1 minute, I'm going to ask you to stop. Ndeye, the floor is yours. Astu?
Oui, alors bonjour, merci à Jemima pour sa présentation. C'était juste pour rebondir un peu et confirmer ce qu'elle vient de dire, que le momentum politique est important, parce que dans le cadre de notre travail, nous collaborons avec la Confédération nationale, le Conseil national de concertation de coopération des ruraux au Sénégal. C'est une plateforme qui regroupe une trentaine d'organisations paysannes. Et nous travaillons avec eux depuis bientôt 4 ans. Et c'est juste depuis un peu moins d'1 an, suite au changement de gouvernement au Sénégal, que nous avons pu noter des avancées. Donc, c'est le résultat d'un travail de longue haleine qui est en cours depuis de nombreuses années. Mais c'est avec vraiment ce changement de régime que nous avons eu plus vraiment d'écoute, de collaboration. Et nous sommes en train vraiment d'avoir des résultats avec le nouveau gouvernement du Sénégal. Donc, concernant, par exemple, le statut juridique des exploitations familiales, la protection sociale, et plus largement avec la révision de la loi d'orientation agro-silvopastorale qui va se faire prochainement. Donc, c'est pour dire que vraiment, c'est quelque chose que nous voyons au quotidien dans notre travail, que les politiques et la situation politique dans nos pays vraiment a un impact sur les avancées que nous souhaitons dans notre travail. Donc, après, ce que l'on souhaite, c'est que ces changements-là et ces améliorations puissent vraiment impacter les femmes. Et ça, c'est un objectif que nous avons en tête et que nous souhaitons atteindre. Parce que l'amélioration des conditions de travail des agriculteurs implique que celle des femmes soit prise en compte. Et c'est une priorité pour nous dans le cadre de notre travail. C'est ce que je souhaitais avoir comme contribution et remercie vivement Jemima pour son excellente présentation. Merci.
You asked to Kumbali?
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup, Doriane, de m'avoir donné la parole. Merci à Jemima. Je vais être brève parce que, bon, Ndeye a parlé de l'évaluation et la réintégration de la loi agro-silvopastorale en cours dont nous faisons partie. Mais moi surtout, je voudrais passer l'information comme quoi que la contribution déterminée au niveau national, donc le CDN au niveau du Sénégal est disponible hein, actuellement avec l'appui de la FAO. C'est justement ma camarade de bureau qui est expert en changement climatique dans le cadre de son projet qui a appuyé l'État du Sénégal dans la mise en œuvre du CDN au niveau national, qui est disponible. Maintenant, ce qu'il faut faire, c'est comment nous rapprocher effectivement de ce nouveau gouvernement en place et comment les accompagner et les appuyer dans la mise en œuvre de ce fameux CDN, parce que c'est vraiment bien écrit et bien articulé au niveau national. Et nous y travaillons. L'autre aspect, juste vraiment pour être brève, c'est par rapport aux lignes directrices volontaires sur les politiques agro, silvo, pastorales au niveau national. Et ça, je pense que ce n'est pas seulement au niveau du Sénégal, mais pratiquement dans tous les pays. Nous, décisivement, en tant que fellow, il serait important, à mon avis, qu'on puisse être accompagné au niveau des politiques, c'est-à-dire qu'on puisse être introduit. Comment Awad et aussi, nous comptons beaucoup aussi sur l'appui de nos mentors, La majeure partie de nos mentors, si je prends l'exemple du Sénégal, sont des personnes, des autorités qui ont des postes stratégiques au niveau politique. Ça, je peux le dire. Je peux donner l'exemple de Mamdo Bodjen, je peux donner l'exemple du docteur Lansana Gagné Sarr qui est là, du docteur Cheikh Omar Ba. Ce sont des personnes qui sont bien assises au niveau politique. Comment est-ce qu'ils pourraient nous introduire en tant que fellow pour qu'on puisse apporter décisivement notre appui dans la mise en œuvre des lignes directrices volontaires au niveau politique? Ça, moi, je pense qu'on pourrait y réfléchir et vraiment voir comment est-ce qu'ils pourraient nous accompagner dans ça. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Kumbali. And finally, Maria.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Maria. Go on.
Thank you so much. And so much gratitude to Dr. Jemima Njuki. I'll go straight to my question. A lot of progress has been made to design and advocate for gender-inclusive policies in agri-food systems worldwide. In the developing countries, particularly sub-Saharan Africa, you rightly mentioned that it is one thing to create and to craft these policies. It is another thing to fund and support their implementation to bring about meaningful transformative impacts. And my question is, what specific tips and action points would you offer the audience, especially the fellows, to spearhead the action from design to meaningful use and implementation of these gender-sensitive, gender-responsive, inclusive agri-food systems policies in sub-Saharan Africa? I thank you.
Jemima, I'd also like to include a question from Yolanda, who is asking if the list of the UNFCCC focal points is available. The UNFCCC gender focal points you mentioned. Over to you, Jemima.
Thank you, and thanks everyone for those questions. So the first thing is I have shared the list of all gender focal points under the UNFCCC. So that's on the chart. Let me see whether I sent it to the whole group chat. But yes, I think you all have it now. That keeps getting updated because sometimes governments do change those focal points. So there's a website where the UNFCCC puts those names. So that's the first one. The second one on implementation that Maria asked, I think this is a very important question because it's one thing to have a policy, it's another thing to have the implementation mechanisms in place. And so one of the things that I have found extremely useful as an entry point is a lot of implementation of policy. So the crafting of the policy may happen at national level, right? But the actual implementation rarely happens at national level. A lot of it actually starts from the ground up, from the local level. But sometimes that local level doesn't also know what the policy in place is. Yeah. And so my urge to all of you is think about policy making as a national process, but think about policy implementation as a local process, because that then starts to support you to see the entry points for implementation. I'll talk, for example, about the Kenyan constitution and the provision of equal rights to land. When that was put in the constitution, there were no constitutional provisions of how this was going to be implemented, but we knew that a lot of the passing of land was happening through, then it was the district land boards, right? And until you then went and talked about that policy to the district land boards and actually said, how do we then support you to implement this constitution provision in the land board and the land administration board at the district level, because that is where the transfer of land happens. The transfer of land doesn't happen at national level in most cases. So to look for these local, and especially with the countries that have devolved governments, to look for these opportunities at the local, at the different levels where implementation actually happens. So that's one very clear entry point for implementation, because at national level, it becomes really difficult to move a whole national machinery to implementation. Those of you that are sitting in ministries of finance or at the intersection of finance and so on can also influence in terms of the budgeting process. So how you also, if you are in a country where there is no national gender responsive budgeting, how do you start conversations around how to have national gender budgeting processes? So it also all depends on where you are sitting within that policy making space. And really hear that first comment from Mami on the game of musical chairs, of course, that we all see with our government, that today we have one minister and in a couple of months you've advanced your discussions and conversations, and in a few months that has changed and you have to start all over again. But also how you also work with some of the technical people that are actually influencing, because in a lot of cases, the political process actually starts getting engaged at the point where a policy, a framework or whatever is tabled in parliament or is tabled in cabinet. All the work that happens before then is actually done by technical people, yeah? All of that is done by technical people. So who are these people? Do we know who these people are and how can we engage with them? Because those are also the people that provide the continuity beyond the political changes of leaders that we see. But every policy-making process starts with a technical team in a ministry sitting down to do a drafting process, to have a discussion on what's going to be the key elements of that policy, to invite stakeholders who might have an input into that. All that always starts with a technical team sitting somewhere. In a lot of cases, it doesn't start with a minister. It doesn't start with a member of parliament. It starts with some technical team sitting somewhere in a department, in a ministry, starting the drafting process and starting the crafting process of how that policy is going to move from idea to implementation. So it's also really identifying what some of these processes, policy-making processes are. So don't just think about the data and what influence you have on the policy, but what is that policy-making process? Where is it starting and where is it ending, and where can you have the most influence?
Okay, thank you so much. I know we are really enjoying these conversations, but unfortunately we are running out of time and I'd like to bring this to a close. I think I'm going to request that we keep compiling these questions. We have lots of experts who are still going to be with us to walk this journey with us. I'm sure that Jemima is available for us to come back to you again. If we get very complicated questions, your door, I know, is open for you to help us craft these responses. What I'm hearing you say is that we need to be very much aware of the policy processes, the policy-making processes, know the right people to engage, know the right time to engage. You need to know what you have and what you want to do with whatever you have, whatever data, whatever information, what are the entry points. And I think that could not have come at a more appropriate time. And that is why we have this course that is that we've just launched yesterday, really going to help the fellows to pay so much attention to what else is happening, not just in their countries, but also globally, because there could be some entry points for them to go and influence their policies by, talking to the person next door in the next country and understanding that this is happening and we could borrow and replicate. Thank you so much, Jemima, for your time. Thank you very much for our wonderful audience for engaging, for sharing your questions. I would like to invite Dr. Michelle Mbocho, our Deputy Director director at Award to give us the vote of thanks and closing. And once Michelle comes in and finishes, I will request the policy fellows to just take a break, a 5-minute break. Don't log out. We will still come back to the same room, the same page, as we now transition to get an overview of the learning community and hear more about the next steps. So I'd like to invite Dr. Michelle Mbocho to come on board, give the vote of thanks and the closing, and then we will be free to go, everybody else, but the fellows will come back. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Doreen, and thank you, everybody. I hope you can all hear me. Once again, I really want to thank Jemima. I know the last 1 week and even this one has been very busy for you. And congratulations once again on this big milestone in your career. And thanks that even in the midst of all this, you found time to be with us and to once again really bring our attention on the importance of agricultural policies, but also the role that women at different levels play in this process. I hope this has been an inspiring discussion or engagement with Jemima. I've seen on the chat so many thank you and enlightening of this conversation, how enlightening this conversation has been. Thank you for always being there to support the work that Award has been doing. For us, getting into this space of policy is an important part of our journey because we started with research a lot around how we can bring research at different level of engagement. But we also realized that it's not just about research and evidence, it's also about how we can shape the environment, how we can make the decision makers think about the specific issues related to gender, to women, and all the marginalized groups. So thank you for always reminding us about the importance of getting the social aspect, the social dimensions of our work. So as we close this, we really want to thank you once again for making the time to be with us. But we also want to thank all the people who have been part of this, working in the background, the award team, the trainers who have been preparing an exciting program for all of us. I'm saying all of us because we all want to hear about how gender and policies work together, what is at the intersection of all of this, and what is it that each and every one of us can bring to the table. So we thank the trainers for preparing this and being ready to have us start this in this big journey to gender policies and also agricultural food systems. We also want to thank the interpreters who are here with us, but also the whole award team that has been at the forefront of these preparations. We want to thank our director, who has really been pushing us, making sure that we are all ready to support you, but also guide you. I know yesterday you've been involved in the introductions of the Policy Innovation Project. I know it has been an engaging webinar and that you are all very ready for this journey. So really be with us, engage us as much as you can, ask all the questions that you have. I know today we couldn't respond to all of them, but please bring them to us and we will be engaging with you too. So with this, I just want to say, welcome to Award, welcome to this training that will be starting in a few minutes, and looking forward to working with you for this. I don't know how many months we are going to have here, but at least the next 2 months, we will be engaging. So all the very best to all of you. Back to you, Doreen.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Let's all clap for ourselves, give ourselves flowers, as we say here in Nairobi, Kwaheri for now. And we look forward to welcoming back all the other policy fellows at quarter to the top of the hour, 15 minutes to the top of the hour. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jemima. Have a good day.
Thank you, everyone. Pleasure to have joined you.
Thank
so
you,
much.
Jemima. All the best for the remaining days.
Oh, it is so hectic here, you cannot believe. This is
I'm so
actually my
proud of you,
downtime, I
Jemima.
would say.
That is
Excellent.
our win.
Yeah.
That was an excellent presentation.
Yeah.
So
Thank
good.
Thank
Thank
you. I'm
you.
glad it was useful. All right, everyone. Bye-bye. And have a
Enjoy the rest of your
Take care.
day.
rest of your convening.
Bye. Thank you, Jemima.
Bye.
Where is the music?
Watu wa upendo hauna dui, hauna kifani kaka. Takabata na savate. Zunguzuka neni shino narudo kubatana kuti tibudirire. Twahitaji upendo ili tusonge mbele. Kutambura kwedu zvichida hatina rudo. Ukosefu wa upendo ulete dhiki ya mambo ni twende. pande pande, weongoza nikufuate, niende mbele, twende shule, zunguka zunguka mbele, niende kuja nami, pande pande, weongoza nikufuate, niende mbele, twende shule, zunguka zunguka mbele. Sitaki.
Hello, everyone. Are we back? Give me a thumbs up if you're back. No, I'm not talking to myself. I'm not alone. Thank you, Mercy, Dawn, Ernesto. I can see most of us. No, it's not missing, but I'm assuming you're there. Yes. Thank you, Doreen, Christelle. Okay, so we are going to, my name is Esther Njero. I'm the Senior Officer, Training and Development at Award, and I'm really happy to be with you. I think we've met, yes, during the mentoring orientation and during the women leadership. So it's really great to reconnect with you all. So we are going to go to the next segment of this session. And we are also joined with by our trainers, the trainers who will be taking you through the Gender in Agri-Food Systems Policies course from next week. You'll get to meet all of them next week on Tuesday. So kindly, let's keep time for that session, because that is when now all this that you've seen being prepared in the background, that is when everything will be happening live. So we are joined by our Anglophone and Francophone team of trainers, but you'll get to know them better next week on Tuesday. So for now, we're going to get into another session of our Learning Community Portal, where we are going to go through an orientation. I probably went through it during the mentoring orientation workshop. Maybe it has rusted a bit. So we are going to reorient, and for those who are doing it the first time, you'll be learning, you'll